Any questions?
Hello, Francis. Can you clarify the word state in relation to...
The word what?
State, like a state.
State.
In relation to absolute consciousness, is it a state?
A state is something that has a beginning and an end in time. And that has objective phenomenal qualities. For instance, if I am tired, that's a state. It has a beginning and an end, and it has certain qualities that I can describe, and that I feel, that I perceive, right? So, in that sense, so happiness is the background, consciousness is the background of all states. And this background is happy and at peace, without problems. But the happiness of it may be veiled by the states that are displayed in front of it, against this background.
But you wouldn't call that a state itself?
No, it's not a state because it doesn't have a beginning or an end. It is reality. Reality is that which is without an end and without a beginning.
But it seems to me that it has qualities, like peace,
yes,
happiness.
But yes, that's true, but these are not objective qualities. We have to make a distinction between phenomenal qualities and noumenal qualities, if you will. Noumenal qualities belong to consciousness alone. For instance, happiness, you could call it a quality, or peace a quality. You could call humor a quality, or understanding, you see, intelligence, a quality. But these are not attributes of an object. An object, you can say, it's black, it's white, it's long, it's short, it's heavy, or a mood, it's dark, or it's painful, or it's a burning sensation, or it's. But happiness, love, beauty, you see, they are not qualities of an object. We have to make a distinction between beautiful and beauty. Beautiful is a quality of an object that take us to the experience of beauty. You see, so beautiful is a quality of an object that takes this specificity of the object, takes us to the experience of beauty. But that which we enjoy is not the beautiful object. It is the beauty that the beautiful object, the experience of beauty that the beautiful object takes us to. It's just that we don't enjoy the taxi that takes us to the party, especially if it is in New York, you know, and it has no more any shock absorber, and the driver is stinky. But you may enjoy the party, right? So the taxi is just a vehicle that takes you to the party.
And so, what I'm trying to investigate the subtle change from this. For example, when I experience this lovely experience of myself, it feels like a vibration that's happening. But I can't think at the same time or conceptualize at the same time. So I'm trying to wonder the distinction where those two meet.
Yeah, we have to make, in the experience of happiness, we have to make also a distinction between the experience of a happy body, which is phenomenal, or of a peaceful mind, or of a worry-free mind, or of a clear mind, and the experience of happiness, of freedom, of intelligence and clarity. So the latter doesn't belong to the mind or to the body. The former, they do. In other words, the body may be struck by the experience of our true nature, and then it responds in kind, it vibrates in kind. It's usually an experience of relief, you see, and of relaxation. So there is a pleasurable element in relief, right? And we are so accustomed to pleasure that pleasure is in most cases a relief. You see, the drug addict experience the relief of his addiction when he takes a fix. But the peace is beyond that, you see. So of course we have the nostalgia of the peace, and but as we get more established in it, there is no more the experience of relief. Because in order to experience a relief, you need to be relieved from a burden, you see. So one obstacle on the path in the beginning is the experience of samadhis, that are states. They are states of the body, which are experienced as being pleasurable, and they are relieved states. So we have to understand that which we seek is not a state, but it's of a more permanent nature. Otherwise we may be stuck, unless we have been informed, we may be stuck in states.
Does the feeling for you when you experience yourself, is that always the same, the experience?
The background of it is always the same. It has different colors depending on the content of the mind and of the body experience that is concomitant with it, that goes with it. You can understand, for instance, the pure experience of our true nature as white light, and the phenomenal content of the mind or of the body as a colored glass that is placed in front of the light, and depending on of the phenomenal content of the body and of the mind experience, then the color of the experience of our true nature will be different. It can be experienced as humor, it can be experienced as love, as understanding, as beauty, you see. And depending also how how we went into it. You know, if you go to it through a joke, you know, you're suspended to the joke, you wait for the punchline, then the punchline arrives, and whap.
Thank you.
Actually, as a follow-up to his question about the states that seemingly veil the background of awareness, so let's say states of loneliness or states of loss or states like that, there's something that doesn't want that, like resistance of being afraid of that. That itself is a state, right? So there's the unpleasant state, and then there is that which doesn't want that and compounds it.
As long as there is mind and body, there is always a state. That which is between in the experience which is between the states, there is no mind, no body. But in other words, there is nothing wrong a priori with states. There is something wrong with bad states. You see, state of misery.
I was trying to...
But on the other hand, to seek states instead of seeking the light, it's like seeking colored glass. And then once you have the colored glass, if the light is not behind it, you don't even see the color. You see what I mean?
My question was more like honing into that particular, it's a sensation / state which resists the previous one.
Yeah, because your constant worry or your constant effort is to try to get rid of those states, you see. And the problem is that the one who wants to get rid of the states is precisely the origin of the state. So unless we see that clearly, we will keep efforting in this direction, and by doing so, we reinforce, we fuel the source of the problem. We have to see the whole picture as I just described it, to see, because it's a kind of catch-22 situation. You see, it's kind of a vicious circle that we have to break, to get out of. And it is only the understanding that enables us to understand, okay, I'm not going to try to do anything about the states, because by doing so, I reinforce the problem. Then you can say, okay, what am I going to do then? Well, accept the situation completely, and then also in the moments when you are available, and when the desire comes to you to investigate. When the desire comes to you to conduct experiments, as we do here, conduct experiments, meaning meditate as an experiment. So because it is this investigation that arises not out of need, not out of misery, but that arises out of enthusiasm and interest, which is going to be fruitful. everything that arises out of misery, we have to be very suspicious about it. Really, to be a truth seeker, truth seeking should never be a chore. It should be more, in the beginning, like a hobby, and then like a vocation. It's a hobby that turns into a vocation. You know, this guy, he was a lawyer, you know, and then he discovered that he had this hobby of gardening, right? And he loved roses, right? Then he becomes a rose expert, you know, and switches activities, and he's very happy having found something that he truly likes. And then all the friends from Yale Law School, you know, who toil 12 hours a day in these big New York firms, they laugh at him. They say, okay, this guy is stupid.
Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify. I mean, you talk a lot about enthusiasm and interest. Those are also states, though, are they not? I mean, they have a beginning.
You
and
can
an end.
you can understand it as states, but no, that which is really, yes, that's very interesting. You know, you see a floor, and there are many rugs on the floor, right? Yeah. And they are disposed along the directions of the room, the main directions of the room, so that when they intersect, what you have left with, I'm talking to a mathematician, so he understands me. So when they intersect, you always have rectangles, right? Because the rugs are rectangles. So you always have rectangles. But some of these rectangles, they are just floor rectangles.
Of course, yes.
Right?
Yes.
So then you can say, okay, this floor rectangle is a rug, because it's a rectangle like the rug. And it seems to have borders. But the borders of this floor rectangle are defined by the objects that are on top of it. So it is not really a rug. So, in this metaphor, the states are the rugs.
The rugs, yes.
Right? And the state of enthusiasm is the floor.
So
it looks like a state. The objection was, yes, but when I feel enthusiasm, it's a state, isn't it? No. That's your true nature. That's your natural state.
Okay. Thank you.
You see what I mean?
No, yes. Well, it has exactly as you described, it has state-like qualities and or appearances, that's what I meant, which is the rectangular shape around it. But
well, yes. The objective content has state-like qualities. Any objective content, because the states are made of objective content, right?
Right.
Therefore, any objective content, because it's objective content, you can call it a state. But the perfume let's say the floor is white, right? And all the rugs are of color. So you could say, okay, that's a white rug, but no, it's not. There is no rug there. The white thing is the proper color of the background.
Right.
You see, and the enthusiasm is the proper color of the background.
So in essence, classifying the higher states as states is really missing the value and the essence of what they really are, even though they have.
When we can be happy and at peace in the absence of objects or in the presence of objects. So when you are experiencing enthusiasm, you are happy. That's as simple as that. When you are enthusiastic, you're happy. You may not notice it, but when you are experiencing enthusiasm, you are happy. So in this moment, because you are experiencing enthusiasm and you are doing whatever activity your enthusiasm is leading you to. Absolutely, yes. Meaning, in this moment, you are experiencing your natural state. Your natural state is the simultaneous experience of objects, whatever activities you are engaged in, and the happiness. So that's a natural state. The glimpse, the timeless glimpse of our true nature is the consciousness, but in the absence of objective content, and therefore in the absence of mind. And then in ignorance, we have the objective content without having lost sight or lost the experience of the background.
Of the background, yes. Okay, thank you.
You spoke a couple days ago about the thoughts that appear in their referent, like awareness.
Yes.
Consciousness. Are those examples of like taxis that you take to the party but that you discard? And
yes. They have to come, it's better if they come naturally to you. You see, so the thought about the truth eventually lead you to the experience of truth. And that's very interesting because it is what I could call the secret power of philosophy. When I was young, when I was in my senior high school year, I became disappointed in philosophy, in part because, the guy who was teaching it was learned, but he was not happy. So I was left with the impression that philosophy was only playing with concepts and words, and that it was leading nowhere. Very different from science, physics, that I was also at the time contemplating. At least we had tangible results. You see, the mathematical thought that was involved led to new prediction. It was a little it is magical, in fact. That led me to choose a scientific path in college rather than humanities. But later on, I understood that in fact philosophy also, when it was well understood, was also delivering results. And for that, because most words are just concepts, but some words and some concepts, instead of leading to other concepts, as I explained the other way, in an endless circle, some words, some concepts lead to the experience of our true nature, which is the real goal of philosophy. You know, the French, I often quote the French philosopher Jacques Maritain, who said the goal of philosophy is to get rid of, to liberate oneself from fear through the use of reason. He didn't say to be happy through the use of reason, but it was going in this direction. And when you take all the philosophers of the ancient times in our Western tradition, and the Greek philosophers, you know, Parmenides, Plato, Epictetus, and I mean all of those guys, they reached inner peace, contentment, you know. But then philosophy diverged. Even someone like Descartes, he says that toward the end of his life he had reached a state of contentment. He was satisfied. You know, so he was satisfied. That was a way to express inner peace. So, yes, it's very important to understand how it works. And the reason it works is that the word consciousness appears in consciousness. And therefore, you cannot have the word without the experience of consciousness. You cannot have the concept of consciousness without the experience. You can have the concept of table without the experience of the table, of the concept of food, and still be hungry. But you cannot have the concept of consciousness without the experience of consciousness. In the same way, as you cannot have the concept of reality without the experience of reality. You see? Because if there is a concept of reality, there is something rather than nothing already. And therefore, there is reality. There is being.
It's interesting because sometimes it seems like the thoughts deliver an experience, but other times they feel somehow... It's like today in the meditation, for instance, I had the thought, everything that arises in awareness is made of awareness.
Yes.
And it had an impact in the way I was feeling, but later when we were having chai, I kind of as an experiment tried to, you know, conjure the thought again, and it felt totally stale, and
the reason is the reason is perhaps the following, is that when we say everything that appears in awareness is made of awareness, we may have simply understood that everything that appears in mind is made of mind. It is not the same. We say everything that appears through mind, you know, is made of mind. I would say to be more precise in my formulation. Is a different experience from everything that appears to awareness or in awareness is made of awareness. Because, for instance, it's obvious that the thought that appears through the mind is made of mind. Because we cannot find the thought anywhere else. You see, you cannot go to a closet or to an armoire, open it and find the thought there. No. But it's different with the computer of the flower or toothbrush on the vanity. You see, we can go to the vanity and find the toothbrush there. So the point is, it's not sufficient to understand that everything that appears through the mind, including our perception, for instance, of the flower, is made of mind. It's not the same as understanding that the flower is made of consciousness. Just as our mind, as a human mind, is made of consciousness, this entire universe is made of consciousness. Our human body, as all the other bodies, is made of consciousness. You know, it's a different threshold. And because when you are only at the first threshold, you understand something, yes, which is an important discovery. But it's not sufficient, because still you are within the parameters of a limited human mind.
I mean, would it be that when the thought arose, it did feel that it was somehow within the mind, I suppose, that, and walking around it.
Well, every thought that arises is in the mind, but
Yeah.
but sometimes you may have a correct glimpse, but then you lose the happiness of it, because then you go back to the mind instead of understanding this distinction there is between mind, which is limited, and consciousness, which is real.
Yeah, and the consciousness requires no thought, in a sense, to know itself.
And it is reality. Because I define consciousness, remember, as the reality that perceives. The reality. So then when we use the word reality, it means that out of which all things are made. It comes from a Latin word res, meaning thing. So reality is that out of which all things are made. So that includes the computers, the flowers, and the stars. So that's a different understanding of consciousness, not in terms of mind, but in terms of reality. Then we move beyond the sphere of mentations. We move into the physical reality. It is part of it, you see. It was very difficult for me to see that. It took me some time.
Yeah, I'm trying to see it now. I feel
to
that
separate consciousness, to make this distinction between consciousness and mind, and to see the reality aspect of consciousness. That's why I'm very careful to define consciousness always as the reality which is hearing these words right now.
So the marker of knowing that you are experiencing that everything arises within consciousness as opposed to everything arising within your mind would be the peace. Is that
yes, the understanding that there is only one consciousness, one reality. We, in the Advaitic pedagogical method, we start with consciousness. But remember that it's called Advaita, meaning non-duality, meaning, so it's about, non-duality means there is only one reality. So consciousness is simply a path of access for us to reality. You see, because we know that we are conscious. And therefore, this path is open to us internally. We are very familiar with consciousness, and we understand that consciousness is what we are, because we say, I perceive, I feel, I decide, etc. So we refer, it becomes easy for us to understand that consciousness is that which defines our centrality. But then, so then that leads us to a tangible experience of reality, you see? But then we have to move from consciousness, from the experience of consciousness, to the understanding that consciousness is the reality that does the perception. So to define consciousness in terms of reality is very important. Because then we move beyond the limitations of a mind. A mind has access only to mentations. And the mind is limited.
So they're synonyms, you could say. Consciousness,
What?
Consciousness and reality are synonyms. And
Listen to my definition of consciousness. You may have a different one, and then they won't be synonyms. It depends what you call consciousness. But in my book, consciousness is the reality which is hearing these words right now. Whatever this reality is. I'm not making any assumptions. But it's beyond the shadow of a doubt that these words are being heard, right? And reality, our real identity, our real self. That's why all these words, being, self, consciousness, awareness, they are when you read the sages of all traditions, you will find it will turn around all these terms.
mm-hmm. It's just, to be honest, it's interesting, this conversation, because I
hope so.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, very interesting. I just you're telling me that I was at a threshold, perhaps.
What?
You're saying I was at a threshold that, and I don't quite see it. And
no, don't worry about what you have understood. That it may seem to disappear, but there is something that you have understood that will never get forgotten. But I was trying just to help you the crucial understanding that liberates us is not like a samadhi, a big samadhi experience, something, that tells us, God is showing in her evening dress, with all the diamonds and the pearls and the glamour. And no, what is important is a clarity that is available to us at any moment. This is something that we can really rely upon, not something fuzzy, new agey, angelical, whatever, No, but something that takes us immediately to a foundation which is unshakable. That's that which matters.
I agree. Yeah.
The sound from one, two, three. Is it only one person?
No,
video is also not good. Yes, look whether everybody's muted. One, two, three, testing, testing. Well, you know, that's this life. That's the beginning of this age, you know. It's very different from streaming, you know, live streaming is still in infancy. From our end, everything seems to be okay.
It says that, I don't know why, it says that the other mic is active, but yours is not.
No, because I can see here that it is active from our end. Unless you have...
They're saying that they hear me pretty well. They hear me pretty well.
Oh, so then you may have changed your input on your thing.
I haven't changed anything, but...
Yes, you see? Here.
I see. Okay.
1, 2, 3. You see? I don't know how that happened,
I
but...
don't know. I don't ever have to touch that. It's usually defaults to be just right. Okay. So now I know that should be blue icicle. And how about this? This is...
No, the output is we don't care. You silence it. Okay, problem solved.
Hi, Francis. Hi, Francis. It's a simple question. It's the love to wisdom, and the true enthusiasm of consciousness to itself.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Is the love to wisdom, the true enthusiasm of consciousness to itself?
Yes, it's enthusiasm is another word for love, yes. And true love is always love for love itself. So, yes.
Thank you.
When you were talking about consciousness and reality, it reminded me of some glimpses I've had where there's something about consciousness which still, at least the way I work with it, where it still has some kind of duality to it, whereas reality, when you were talking about it, opened up this, that there's no separation anywhere, so that what's manifesting is the same as the consciousness. I'm even using duality to talk about it, but it all happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. And that's a different realm.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I just wanted to ask this in light of the other questions. To go back to your translation of Parmenides, I never understood, there's this idea that Parmenides had a student named Zeno, and Zeno made these paradoxes that my first teacher, a philosophy teacher, said were meant to illustrate the truth of what Parmenides said. So one of the paradoxes is meant to show that there's no motion, that everything is one thing and it doesn't move. And so there's a race between
Achilles and the tortoise.
tortoise. And when I was thinking about Parmenides recently, I looked it up because I wanted to understand it. And they say it's just about infinity and it doesn't prove anything. But when I think about it, and I keep thinking about the cutting of the distance in half and how you can never cut it all the way, you can keep going, it actually makes me think then that nothing is being cut. I don't know, I just wondered if you could explain that, or if the paradox really does show that there's no motion.
No, I think the Zeno paradoxes were at the time they didn't have the mathematical instrument to deal with the one which is easiest to understand is the one about the other one is about the arrow and the target. So it goes that before the arrow reaches the target, it first needs to have reached the halfway point between the archer and the target. And then from this halfway point, before it reaches the target, it needs to reach another halfway point. And so there is an infinity of halfway points to reach, and therefore the false conclusion of Zeno is that therefore the arrow will never reach the target. What he was forgetting or not taking into account, that as the distance was diminishing, being divided by 2 every time, the time that was required to travel was also divided by 2. Okay? So the time that is required to reach the target is in fact the sum of a series which has an infinite number of terms, but each term gets smaller, much smaller, and much smaller, so that this series is, as we say in mathematics, convergent. This series has a finite sum. Therefore, the time is finite.
If it can keep going and get smaller and smaller, why doesn't it stay infinite?
Because that's the beauty of mathematics, is that something which has a sum which has an infinite number of terms, but each term's getting smaller, 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 this sum may be finite. That was, Newton and Leibniz, they started that, it's called calculus.
Oh, okay, I'm just disappointed that Parmenides, Zeno didn't give me something to think about, because the Achilles and the hare is the same thing. You keep cutting the distance in half.
Yes, it's the same. It's a little more complicated because they are both running.
Right.
Whereas in the other cases, it's in the different reference frame. So, but it's the same problem, in fact.
Okay, I had another quick question.
Yeah, so let me add a comment. These guys at the time, there was no distinction really between physics, which is the explanation of the world, and metaphysics, which is about the absolute. So their physical model was just a model. It was the science of the time. And these models have evolved. Whereas the metaphysical intuition, the one about the truth, has not evolved. it cannot evolve. It's what is called perennial philosophy. So the fact that one aspect of what all these guys were saying was perfectible, and therefore was wrong, they were the scientists of the period. That's how science has evolved. These old guys, they invented also the notion of atoms. And the brilliant physicist Richard Feynman, he was asked one day, what was, in your opinion, the most, how do you say, fecund, the most fruitful concept in physics? And he said it was the concept of atoms. I mean, we may disagree with that, but that traces back to the Greek, right?
I just wanted there to be a way to conceptualize oneness that was kind of mapped onto the physical world. But then I had another question, a more simple question, I think. Well, not really, but in order to experience consciousness without objects, would that always be a samadhi state?
Will that always be a...
Would you need to go have what they call samadhi, or is that available?
No, it's because if we call samadhi a state, precisely it's not a samadhi, but they call it nirvikalpa samadhi. So, nirvikalpa samadhi means a state without objects, absolutely without objects. But even that requires some distinction. Because after all, when we understand a joke, for instance, this understanding takes place in a state without object. So this intelligence, understanding, always takes place, is always the experience of our natural state. But the problem we were dealing with, and the answer to which we were seeking, was a relative issue. It's like, what should I do with my dog when I am away? Oh, I have this friend. Okay, found the solution. The solution comes out of the blue, right? In a moment, because before the solution comes to us, we don't have it. We have only the question. And then we have the formulation of the answer. But between the question and the formulation, there is a moment without anything, right? There is a gap. In this gap, the creativity comes to us. Now, and that is a gap. There is only consciousness. So it would be called a nirvikalpa samadhi, because there is no manifestation there. It's a gap between two states, and it's an experience of consciousness. However, what we are seeking is not a question about consciousness itself. It's a question about my dog and what you see. Very different in the case of truth seeker, because they are seeking an answer about reality, etc. And so then they get the answer about that is appropriate to their question. You see? And in fact, it is only this type of answer that is liberating. So we should perhaps reserve the expression nirvikalpa samadhi to the liberating answer that takes place in pure consciousness when that which is being sought is consciousness, or a question about the qualities or how to get there, what is it, or any question of this kind, what is life, what is reality. In fact, even we can ask questions about consciousness without getting an answer which is true, which is correct, but which is not yet liberating. For instance, if we ask the question, is there consciousness? Right? That's a question about consciousness. The answer comes from the experience of consciousness, and the answer is simply yes. But this answer, this experience, because the answer comes from experience, it's not just conceptual. We say yes from experience, not from hearsay, we can say yes because... But this answer is not liberating, because consciousness could still be dependent upon the body, dependent upon the brain, dependent upon the mind, you see? So an answer that would be liberating would be the answer to the question, is consciousness that I now know exists, is consciousness limited? You see? That would be a different type of question. And then the answer to this question, the experiential answer to this question, that would have a liberating impact. Because at that moment it moves us beyond the confines of the body-mind.
Thank you.
Hi, Francis. I was wondering if you could help me distinguish or tell me the relationship between consciousness and awareness, and how does it apply to...
That's very simple. In French, we don't have two words. We have only one. So, for me, consciousness equals awareness equals the reality which is hearing these words. So, since English is more your field of experience, how would you call in English the reality which is hearing these words right now? Would you call it consciousness or awareness?
Both.
We could have a vote. So who goes for awareness? Who goes for consciousness? G. We have to call the clerk. Roll call.
So I wanted to know, how does it relate to unconscious person, a person under anesthesia, a person who's hypnotized?
Well, we should have, take the guy is in a coma, and he's described by the nurse and the MDs in the emergency room as unconscious. Now the guy comes out of the coma and says, oh, I had this wonderful experience. I see my parents who are dead, my friends who are dead, etc., and they were inviting me, and there was all this light. And the guy was experiencing a lot of things. So, was he unconscious? For everybody around him, he was unconscious. Same thing, we see someone asleep. We say, oh, he's unconscious. And the guy is dreaming that he's in Hawaii on the beach, having some cool beer. So we have to make a difference between what we could call sentience, which is a quality that we attribute to objects, to human bodies, to dogs, to cows, to rabbits, chicken. Yeah. Dogs, yes, cats, fish, lobster. And so that's and that, for instance, we don't attribute usually to tables, to rocks, to mountains. Sometimes trees, people think of perhaps, or electrons, perhaps, you know. Some electrons seems to be very smart, you know, and how they choose their path between two slits, and so that's but we don't know. So a priori we attribute this quality to an object, and like the doctor in the emergency room, you may be mistaken because the guy is deemed unconscious, but in fact he has very nice dreams. So that's a quality which is attributed by human beings to objects. And the human beings are external to these objects, and they attribute this quality to objects. What I call consciousness is a very private experience that each of us has. The two don't intersect, really. So to use the same name, the same noun to describe them is fraudulent. It's fraudulent. It's like calling an apple and an orange the same thing. Well, they taste differently, they have different shape, etc.
So someone should change it.
What?
Someone should change it. Either the medical community or the philosophical community, because they're so different.
Yes, so and it is only, but it is only the one, and if I ask you the question, which one are you the most interested in?
The one here.
The one inside, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. So, and that's the one we are talking about here. And I'm not qualified to talk about the other one. I don't have the credentials.
Thank you. And the other question I had was to distinguish between what's coming from the mind versus what's coming directly from the consciousness.
Stop smoking pots there. Open the doors. Not this one. Not this one. Not this door. Well, it's an eventful. It's an eventful day. So, I don't know where were we?
We're talking about, if I have a problem, many possibilities for solutions come to me. How would I know which one is through my mind and which one is coming directly through my consciousness?
Well, the one which is self-evident comes from the right place. The one with which you are in total agreement. The one that doesn't leave any hesitation in you. When you have to make a decision, often we are too much in a hurry to make it. We tend to, because we want to feel safe, we make this decision, and the situation is not ripe for us to make the decision. So basically, we can think ahead of time, yeah, but before we, I don't know what they are doing in the kitchen, but open the, yeah. Open the other ones. That's about there. Huh? What?
Perhaps the house is really burning. She's just sitting here. It's a no worries. Was it something we said?
Leave it open for a while. I think this line of questioning is not welcome.
Looks like universe is telling us something.
What?
One of the ovens is not working, so she's grilling the veggies and toast. She's no choice.
Yeah, but you should boil them. Huh? Well, boiled asparagus is good too.
So the reality that's hearing these words, but our ability to know ourselves or know ourself. There's always a separation though between us and God, in the sense that there's always a mystery and a not knowing. I mean, or maybe that's not true, but it seems there's always there's places where we don't know, where it's mystery. This intelligence that's so much more vast than ours that manifests us this. So isn't that a kind of a separation between whatever that intelligence is, that's so much vaster and comprehensive, and us? That's a separation, yeah?
What makes you think that God, as you describe, knows?
Right.
Why exclude the fact that God knows through minds?
Well, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, because we tend to see God in our image. That's the word of Voltaire. Someone was saying, "Oh, God made man." At the time, it was not politically correct. In His image, and Voltaire quipped, and conversely, man made God in the image of man. So we see God as having a body and a mind. But why not God having a body, which is, of course, the universe, everything, but then the mind is just consciousness. And there might be many rooms in God's mansion.
I guess it just seems that what's the source of beauty? That
there might be different realms, yes, and timeless realms, for instance, realms of ideas and other dimensions. I mean, the sky is the limit, not even the sky, right? So we cannot limit God according to our human narrow views.
Well, but that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. So, can a human?
Yeah, but if you say God is like this, you're already limiting it.
Okay.
So if you are making the assumption that there is a universal mind, that's also you are eliminating the opposite possibility that there is no universal mind. You see? That's all. I was not saying there is no universal mind. But I think, why not be open to the possibility? And it's just the same thing as often you see people say, well, the world doesn't exist independently from mind, from mind. So why limit God's possibilities? Other people say everything is preordained, predetermined. In other words, what will be the time of our death or whatever is already predetermined. Well, that doesn't jibe with the freedom of God. You see, we perhaps yes, perhaps no. What do we know? Everything that there is hell, and there is heaven, and there is reincarnation, and all of this stuff. It's kind of a lack of humility to pretend that we may know anything. And even, why would our human logic apply to this realm? In other words, we have to reach an absolute not knowing about God or reality. And that's the bad news. The good news is it doesn't matter, because that's what we are. That's our reality. So we don't need to know anything about it because we are it. It's better to be it and not know it than to know it and not be it.
Right. So
you see,
at that level of knowing or being,
it's better to eat the cake.
There's no
without
separation.
knowing what it is made from, than to know what the ingredients are and not eat the cake.
Okay. Right. So the only separation then is from a mind that wants to understand the way a mind understands.
Yes.
Then there's separation.
So yeah, and always when we reach this point, we have to go back to the things the mind cannot grasp that which is beyond the mind.
Right.
It cannot even represent it. So the only way it can be represented is in the moment when the intuition comes from that place. But then this intuition has a very short shelf life, if you will. It vanishes. But it doesn't matter because we are. That's our reality, you see.
Yeah.
God, we are made of God. God is our reality, if we want to call it God.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Hey, Francis, quite a few years ago, I remember a metaphor that starting to resonate with me a little bit more. It was in Zen, and it was words of effect. I think it was, if you have enough insights or understandings, at some point you get caught in the tiger's mouth, I think was the word, or the lion's mouth. Being the hunter becomes the hunted, so to speak. You're looking for God, and now God's looking for you. And there's as we have said, the mind doesn't understand what we're calling consciousness, but something does. And that's the tiger, is it not? That's the good news. It's not the state seeker. That's the good news, is it not?
Every time we think of God or of reality or the absolute, in fact, it's not we who are thinking of God. It's God thinking of us.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And so we have to be open to this possibility.
Self-validating.
Yes. Yeah. But talking too much in terms of God kind of erases the path that leads to God. Because the path that leads to God is within. It's the esoteric path. Esoteric means inside. Yeah. And not the exoteric path. The only purpose of the exoteric path is to take us to the esoteric path. And so that's what normally religions would do. They would make us monks. The word monks comes from the Greek monos, which would mean one. So a monk is one who is seeking the oneness. But it's not what they do. So the shortest exoteric path is the one with the teacher, because that's what the teacher does. The teacher is outside. So the teacher and the teachings are part of the exoteric path, because they're outside, they're external objects. But they point towards the reality inside. So they are the fastest journey back to the esoteric path. You see? So then the esoteric path is God within, if you will, which shines as consciousness. That's it. To be open to the possibility that that which is hearing these words is God's presence in each of us. If we want to speak in those religious terms, which I don't use too often any longer. Not that they don't have their values, they do.
It seems that religions in general, especially Western, well, Christianity, when things aren't really contemplated or just passed down, the mind tends to put a moralistic twist to everything and make it morally based, almost like rules based. I mean, Jesus supposedly says, love one another, vice, as a rule, vice, love the other as yourself. The pointer being as one, see yourself in the other.
Exactly. It's not.
But it's a rule based.
You must.
Moralistic. Yeah, exactly.
You must love the jerk. Are we through?